Welcome back, guys, to Military Paranormal Time. 66% of you still haven't subscribed. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Thank you. The transport plane's engines screamed against the Arctic wind as Private First Class Tommy Harker pressed his face against the frost-covered window. Below, the endless white expanse of the polar plateau stretched like a frozen ocean, unmarked and merciless. His breath fogged the glass, and through the condensation he caught his first glimpse of Polar Echo Station, a dark cluster of prefab buildings squatting against the ice like a wound on pale skin. Tommy's hands trembled, though not entirely from the cold seeping through the fuselage. Back in Newark, his wife Margaret had clung to him at the train station, her belly swollen with their first child. "Promise me you'll come home," she'd whispered, her voice breaking. "Promise me, Tommy." He'd made that promise 6 weeks ago, before he understood what the Arctic truly meant. Before he learned that some places existed beyond the reach of warmth, hope, or divine mercy. "First time in the ice, Harker." Sergeant Bill Crawford's voice cut through the engine noise. The older man sat across from him, arms crossed over his chest, eyes half closed but alert. Crawford had the look of someone who'd seen too much. Weathered skin, a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, and a permanent scowl that suggested the world had long ago stopped surprising him. "Yes, Sergeant," Tommy replied, straightening his posture despite the cramped space. Around them, 8 other men sat in similar states of nervous anticipation. This wasn't a routine rotation. This was a recovery mission, though nobody had explained exactly what they were recovering from. "Listen up!" Master Sergeant Eugene Walsh stood at the front of the cargo bay, one hand gripping an overhead strap as the plane bucked through turbulence. Walsh was a bear of a man, 6'3" with shoulders that barely fit through standard door frames. His voice carried the kind of authority that made men snap to attention even when they were seated. "Polar Echo went dark 72 hours ago. Last transmission was garbled. Weather's been hell. Could be equipment failure, could be something else. Our job is simple. Get in, assess the situation, extract any survivors, and secure the facility." Tommy exchanged glances with the man next to him, Corporal Jimmy Dalton, a lanky kid from Georgia who couldn't have been more than 19. Jimmy's leg bounced nervously, his fingers drumming against his rifle stock in an unconscious rhythm. "Something else?" Jimmy muttered under his breath. What the hell does something else mean? Before Tommy could respond, the plane dropped suddenly, falling through an air pocket that sent several men's stomachs into their throats. Equipment rattled. Someone cursed. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Approaching drop zone. Weather's deteriorating fast. We've got maybe a 10-minute window." Walsh continued as if the turbulence hadn't happened. "Corporal Vincent Hayes will handle communications. Private Eugene Fletcher, you're on medical. Staff Sergeant Robert Mitchell takes point on entry procedures." He gestured to each man as he spoke. Mitchell was a stone-faced professional who'd served in Korea. Fletcher was nervous but competent, constantly checking and rechecking his medical kit. Then, Walsh's eyes landed on a man sitting alone near the rear. Technical Sergeant Frank Kozlowski. Kozlowski was different from the others, quieter, more watchful. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging, calculating. Tommy had heard whispers that Kozlowski wasn't regular Army, that he worked for some intelligence division nobody talked about. The man's presence created an invisible barrier. Even Crawford seemed to give him space. "Kozlowski handles specialized equipment," Walsh said curtly, offering no further explanation. The plane banked hard, beginning its descent. Through the window, Tommy watched the station grow larger and wronger. Even from altitude, something felt off about the buildings. They sat at odd angles, as if the ice beneath them had shifted. One structure's roof had partially collapsed. No lights burned in any window. No smoke rose from the heating vents. "Looks dead," Crawford muttered, leaning over to peer past Tommy's shoulder. "Maybe they evacuated," Jimmy offered hopefully. Crawford's expression darkened. "In this weather? To where?" The plane's landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan. Tommy's stomach knotted. He thought of Margaret again, of her last letter tucked inside his jacket pocket. She'd written about painting the nursery yellow, about her mother's advice on handling labor pains, about mundane, beautiful things that belonged to a world of warmth and life. The Arctic belonged to something else entirely. As the plane touched down with a jarring thud, skidding across the improvised ice runway, Tommy caught one final detail through the window. A dark crack running beneath the station's eastern wing, visible even through the blowing snow. The crack seemed too regular, too deliberate to be natural. It looked almost like something had been clawing its way up from below. The plane shuddered to a stop. Walsh moved to the cargo door. "Gear up. We move in 5. Stay together, stay alert, and remember, nobody goes anywhere alone." Tommy grabbed his rifle, checked his ammunition, and tried to ignore the cold dread spreading through his chest like frost creeping across glass. Outside, the wind screamed, and beneath the ice, something waited. The cold hit Tommy Harker like a physical blow the moment the cargo door opened. It wasn't just temperature. It was a living thing that clawed at exposed skin, invaded lungs, and turned breath into crystallized agony. He'd trained in Colorado winters, endured New Jersey's harshest snowstorms, but nothing had prepared him for the Arctic's absolute hostility to human life. "Move out!" Walsh's command cut through the howling wind. Tommy stumbled down the ramp, boots crunching into snow that squeaked beneath his weight, a sound that meant temperatures well below zero. The world had become monochrome, white ground, gray sky, and the dark, skeletal outline of Polar Echo Station looming 50 yards ahead. The wind drove snow horizontally, stinging any exposed flesh, reducing visibility to ghostly shapes and shadows. The 10-man team formed a loose column, Crawford taking point with Walsh, while Tommy found himself in the middle alongside Jimmy Dalton and Fletcher. Kozlowski moved at the rear, his movements precise and economical, eyes constantly scanning the terrain as if expecting something to emerge from the white void. "Christ, it's like walking into a freezer," Jimmy muttered, his southern accent thickened by chattering teeth. "Quiet," Crawford snapped without looking back. As they approached the station, details emerged through the snow. The main building sat at a slight angle, its foundation clearly compromised. Metal panels hung loose, banging arrhythmically in the wind. Windows stared back at them like dead eyes, dark, empty, revealing nothing. But it was the snow around the perimeter that made Tommy's instincts scream wrong. The drifts were disturbed in patterns that made no sense. Not footprints exactly, but depressions, wide, circular impressions that spiraled outward from the station's foundation in concentric rings. They were partially filled with fresh snow, but still visible, as if something heavy had pressed down repeatedly in the same spots, testing the ground. "Sergeant Walsh?" Corporal Vincent Hayes spoke up, his voice tight. Hayes was their communications specialist, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses constantly fogging in the cold. "These markings, they're not from personnel evacuation." Walsh knelt beside one of the depressions, brushing snow away with a gloved hand. The ice beneath was smooth, almost polished, with a faint discoloration, a yellowish tinge that didn't belong. He touched it, then jerked his hand back. Even through his glove, he'd felt something. "It's warm," Walsh said quietly. The words hung in the Arctic air like a death sentence. "Warm?" Mitchell moved closer, his weathered face skeptical. "Sergeant, nothing out here is warm. Touch it yourself." Mitchell did. His expression shifted from doubt to confusion to something approaching fear. That's not possible. This is pack ice. It's been frozen for centuries." Tommy felt his heart rate accelerate. Behind him, he heard Kozlowski's breathing change, faster, more focused. The technical sergeant had pulled out a device Tommy didn't recognize, something with dials and a needle that jumped erratically as Kozlowski swept it over the ground. "Elevated thermal readings," Kozlowski reported, his voice flat and professional. Subsurface heat source approximately 8 to 12 feet below current position, moving in a circular pattern. Moving? Jimmy's voice cracked. What do you mean moving? Kozlowski ignored him, adjusting his device. Pattern suggests deliberate motion, not geological, not mechanical. Walsh stood, brushing snow from his knees. We proceed. Hayes, try raising the station on short range. Fletcher, stay sharp. If there are survivors, they might need immediate medical attention. Mitchell, you're with me on entry. Crawford, cover R6. And if something's down there? Crawford asked bluntly, gesturing at the disturbed snow. Then we find out what it is and neutralize it if necessary. Walsh's tone suggested the discussion was over. They moved toward the main entrance. The door hung partially open, another wrong detail. In Arctic conditions, every door stayed sealed against the cold. Heat loss meant death. Tommy's hands tightened on his rifle as they approached the dark threshold. The wind suddenly died. Complete silence descended over the plateau, so abrupt and total that it felt like going deaf. The snow stopped blowing. The banging metal panels ceased their rhythm. Even the men's breathing seemed muted, swallowed by an invisible presence pressing down from above, or rising up from below. I don't like this, Jimmy whispered. Nobody disagreed. Crawford reached the door first, pressing his back against the frame before swinging his rifle around the corner. Clear! But his voice lacked conviction. Walsh signaled. Dalton, Harker, you're with Mitchell and me. First sweep of the entry corridor. Everyone else, hold position and maintain sight lines. Tommy's mouth went dry. He thought of Margaret's letter, of her handwriting describing something as simple and beautiful as yellow paint. He thought of the promise he'd made, a promise that suddenly felt very fragile. As he stepped toward the entrance, following Mitchell's broad back into the darkness, Tommy noticed something that made his blood freeze colder than the Arctic air. The door's interior surface was covered in condensation. Water droplets ran down the metal in thin streams, pooling at the base. But condensation formed when warm air met cold surfaces. The inside of Polar Echo Station was warmer than the outside. Something inside was generating heat. Mitchell's flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the entry corridor, revealing walls slick with moisture. The beam trembled slightly, the first sign Tommy had seen that the hardened veteran was rattled. Radio check. Walsh spoke into his handset. Hayes, confirm signal. Static crackled back, then Hayes's voice, distorted. Confirmed, Sergeant, but I'm reading interference. Strong electromagnetic disruption from inside the facility. Walsh exchanged glances with Mitchell. Source? Unknown. It's not standard equipment. The pattern is irregular, almost rhythmic. Tommy felt sweat forming beneath his layers despite the cold. Behind them, the entrance gaped open, the pale Arctic daylight barely penetrating 10 feet into the corridor. Ahead, the darkness seemed absolute, hungry. We go in, Walsh decided, but nobody separates. We move as one unit. As they advanced into Polar Echo Station, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't entering an abandoned facility. They were entering something's throat. And somewhere deep below, in the spaces between ice and earth, something ancient was waking to the presence of warm blood and beating hearts. The corridor swallowed them whole. Tommy's flashlight beam trembled as he swept it across the interior of Polar Echo Station. The walls glistened with moisture that had no business existing in an Arctic facility. Pipes dripped steadily, the sound echoing through the hallway like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. His breath came in visible clouds, but the air temperature was wrong. Not freezing, but cold enough to sting, hovering somewhere just above zero. Warmer than outside, colder than life. Jesus Christ, Mitchell whispered, his flashlight revealing the first signs of habitation. A coffee mug sat on a metal shelf, still half full, a thin layer of ice forming across its surface. Beside it, a paperback novel lay open, its pages swollen from moisture. Someone had been reading it recently. The bookmark was only a third of the way through. "They left in a hurry," Walsh observed, moving deeper into the corridor. His voice was steady, but Tommy noticed how the master sergeant's free hand stayed near his sidearm. Behind them, the rest of the team filed in. Crawford took up position at the rear, constantly glancing back at the entrance as if expecting it to slam shut. Kozlowski moved along the walls, running his strange device across the metal panels, occasionally pausing when the needle jumped. "Sergeant Walsh," Kozlowski called softly. "Thermal signatures are stronger inside. Heat source is directly below us, approximately 15 feet down, still moving." Jimmy Dalton's breathing quickened beside Tommy. "Moving? You keep saying that. What's moving?" Kozlowski's cold eyes fixed on the young corporal. "I don't speculate, son. I report data. The data says something beneath this station is generating heat and changing position." "That's enough," Walsh cut in. "Hayes, try the internal communications system. See if anyone's monitoring." Hayes moved to a wall-mounted intercom panel, brushing away frost from its surface. He flipped switches, adjusted dials. Static burst from the speakers, loud and harsh in the confined space, making several men flinch. "Polar Echo Station, this is Rescue Team Alpha. Does anyone copy? Repeat, does anyone copy?" The static continued for several seconds. Then it changed. The white noise began to pulse, not randomly, but in a rhythm that was sickeningly familiar. It matched the cadence of a human heartbeat, slow, steady, deliberate. The men stared at the speaker, transfixed and horrified. "That's not interference," Fletcher said quietly, his medical training recognizing the pattern immediately. That's biological." The pulse continued for 10 seconds, then abruptly stopped. Silence crashed back over them, heavier than before. "Keep moving," Walsh ordered, but Tommy heard the strain in his voice now. They advanced through the living quarters. 8 bunks lined the walls, each made with military precision. Personal effects remained untouched, photographs of wives and children, letters from home, a harmonica, a worn Bible. Tommy's eyes caught on one photo, a young man, probably mid-20s, standing with a dark-haired woman and a toddler. The soldier was grinning, his arm around his family. The photo was dated 3 months ago. "No signs of struggle," Mitchell reported, checking each bunk. "No blood, no damage. It's like they just walked away." "Or were called away," Crawford muttered darkly. They entered the mess hall. The scene here was more disturbing in its normalcy. Plates sat on tables, food still on them, frozen solid now but clearly abandoned mid-meal. A fork lay beside one plate, positioned as if someone had set it down intending to return in a moment. Coffee had spilled across a table and frozen in a spreading brown stain that looked disturbingly like a reaching hand. Tommy's imagination conjured the scene. Men eating, talking, living. Then something happened. Something that made them stop mid-bite and leave. But leave to where? There were no emergency protocols that included abandoning your post without winter gear in Arctic conditions. That was suicide. "Clock stopped at 2:17. Jimmy pointed to the wall-mounted timepiece, its hands frozen. Fletcher checked his watch. That was 74 hours ago, right around when they sent the last transmission. Walsh moved to the kitchen area, inspecting the equipment. The stoves were cold, but the ovens showed signs of recent use. He opened one and recoiled slightly. Inside sat a tray of bread rolls, perfectly baked, untouched. Someone had been preparing food when everything stopped. "They were expecting to eat," Walsh said. Whatever happened, it was sudden. A door at the far end of the mess hall led deeper into the complex. A sign above it read, "Operations and Communications." Tommy felt dread settle in his stomach like lead weight. That was where they'd find answers, or something worse. Kozlowski's device suddenly shrieked, the needle slamming to the right side of its gauge. He quickly adjusted settings, his normally expressionless face showing the first crack of concern. "Sergeant, thermal readings just spiked. Heat source is moving again, faster this time. It's rising." "Rising?" Walsh turned sharply. "Toward us?" "Affirmative. Current depth approximately 12 feet and ascending." The floor beneath Tommy's boots vibrated, subtle, barely perceptible but undeniable. A low-frequency rumble traveled through the structure, more felt than heard. It reminded him of standing near a train track when a locomotive approached, that sub-audible pressure that announced something massive in motion. The vibration continued for 5 seconds, then stopped. In the silence that followed, they heard it clearly. A dragging sound from somewhere below, metal on stone, slow and deliberate. It moved from one end of the station to the other, as if something was testing the foundation, exploring, learning the layout of the building above it. "Positions," Walsh commanded quietly. The men spread out instinctively, weapons raised, each covering a different angle. But what were they aiming at? The threat was beneath them, behind walls and floor and frozen earth. The dragging sound stopped directly under the mess hall. Tommy stared down at his boots, at the metal floor plates. For a horrible moment, he imagined them bulging upward, imagined something pale and segmented pushing through. He thought of Margaret, of her last words. "Promise me you'll come home." "We need to access the sublevel," Kozlowski said, his voice cutting through the tension. "These facilities have maintenance crawl spaces. Whatever's down there, we need visual confirmation." "Like hell," Crawford growled. "We're not opening any hatches to that thing." "That thing," Kozlowski replied coldly, "might be our missing personnel." The statement hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. Nobody truly believed the men of Polar Echo had somehow ended up beneath the station. But the alternative, that something else was down there, was worse. Walsh made a decision. "Mitchell, Crawford, find the access hatch to the sublevel. Don't open it, just locate it. Hayes, see if you can get the security cameras online. If this place has a surveillance system, maybe we can see what happened. Fletcher, inventory the medical supplies. If there are survivors somewhere, we'll need equipment. Dalton, Harker, you're with me. We're checking operations." As the team split up, Tommy felt his isolation despite being surrounded by armed men. The station was too quiet, too empty. It felt less like a building and more like a shell, something hollow that had been emptied of its soft interior, leaving only the hard exterior behind. They approached the operations door. Walsh reached for the handle, then paused. His hand hovered inches from the metal, and Tommy saw why. The door was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than the surrounding air. "On 3, Walsh counted quietly. 1, 2. The door burst open from the inside. Tommy's finger tightened on the trigger before his brain caught up with his eyes. The door hadn't burst open violently. It had swung inward slowly, pushed by nothing but air pressure and gravity. Beyond the threshold lay the operations room, bathed in the crimson glow of emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of blood and shadow. The lack of an immediate threat didn't calm Tommy's racing heart. If anything, the emptiness felt more menacing. Walsh entered first, weapon raised, sweeping left to right with practiced efficiency. Tommy and Jimmy followed, their boots silent on the rubberized floor. The operations center was the nerve system of Polar Echo, walls lined with radio equipment, monitoring stations, weather tracking systems, and banks of recording devices that captured signals from across the Arctic and beyond. Everything was still running. Reels turned slowly on tape machines, recording static. Monitors flickered with data streams, updating atmospheric readings from sensors that no longer mattered. A teletype machine in the corner clacked suddenly, making all 3 men jump, before falling silent again. The paper it had been printing hung limply, covered in alphanumeric code that meant nothing to Tommy. "Power's still on," Walsh observed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Generator must be running." but it was the main communications console that drew Tommy's attention. The chair sat pushed back, as if someone had stood up quickly. Headphones lay on the desk, one speaker pressed against a notepad. Tommy could see handwriting on the pad, hasty, shaking letters that grew increasingly erratic down the page. Walsh picked up the notepad carefully, angling it toward the red light. His jaw tightened as he read. It's a log. Last entry is from Corporal Dennis Rourke, night shift operator. He paused, reading silently, then continued aloud. February 14th, 02:15 hours. Vibrations beneath station increasing. Not seismic. Pattern too regular. Mitchell says it's ice shifting. I don't think so. 02:23 hours. It stopped. Why did it stop? 02:47 hours. It's knocking. Christ, it's knocking back. Every time I move, it answers. Like it knows I'm up here. Jimmy's breathing grew rapid beside Tommy. Knocking? What does that mean? Walsh flipped the page. His face paled. 03:14 hours. Called Sergeant Willis. He heard it too. Came from the subfloor access in the barracks. Willis went to check. That was 20 minutes ago. He hasn't come back. I can hear something moving through the ventilation. Not air. Something else. It's getting warmer. I can't reach anyone on internal comms. The radio is picking up something. It sounds like... The entry stopped mid-sentence, the pen dragging across the page in a jagged line, as if Rourke's hand had been jerked away suddenly. That's it, Walsh said quietly. That's the last entry. Tommy moved to the recording equipment, his hands shaking as he examined the machines. Dozens of tapes sat in marked slots, standard signal recordings from various frequencies. But one machine at the end of the row was different. It was running, but the tape wasn't labeled. Someone had scrawled across it in red marker. Subfloor channel, do not play over speakers. Sergeant, Tommy called, his voice cracking slightly. You need to see this. Walsh and Jimmy joined him. The three men stared at the tape as it continued its slow revolution, recording something from somewhere below them. Subfloor channel? Jimmy whispered. Why would they be recording under the station? Walsh reached for the machine's headphone jack. A pair of monitoring headphones hung nearby, and he carefully placed them over his ears. His finger hesitated over the volume knob, then slowly turned it up. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Walsh's face drained of color. His knuckles went white, gripping the edge of the console. For 30 seconds, he stood frozen, listening to something the others couldn't hear. Then he ripped the headphones off so violently the cord snapped. Jesus Christ, he breathed, backing away from the machine. Jesus Christ. What? Jimmy demanded. What did you hear? Walsh's hands trembled. The first time Tommy had seen the Master Sergeant show real fear. It's breathing. Something's breathing down there, but it's not just breathing, it's trying to speak. Speak? Tommy felt his reality tilting. What do you mean, speak? The rhythm, the pattern. It's mimicking speech patterns, like it's learning how to form words. Walsh turned to face them, and Tommy saw something in his eyes he'd never seen before. Absolute terror struggling against military discipline. And it's not alone. There are multiple entities. They're communicating with each other. The room fell silent, except for the soft whir of machinery. Then, from somewhere deep within the station's infrastructure, came a sound that froze all three men in place. A voice. Distorted, stretched, barely recognizable as human, but unmistakably a voice. It echoed through the ventilation system, through the walls themselves, surrounding them. Har, Kerr. Tommy's blood turned to ice. That was his name. Something beneath the station had just called his name. Did it just... Jimmy started. Harker! Louder this time, clearer, coming from multiple directions at once. The voice wasn't quite right. The syllables were too long, the tone too flat, like a recording played at the wrong speed. But it knew his name. Walsh grabbed Tommy's shoulder. How? How does it know your name? I didn't. Tommy's mind raced. He hadn't spoken his name since entering the station. He'd barely spoken at all. Then he remembered. The cargo plane. The briefing. Walsh had called out assignments, called each man by name. But that was outside, 50 yards from the station, through howling wind, and the realization hit like a physical blow. Whatever was beneath them had been listening. Even outside, through ice and earth and storm, it had been listening to every word they said. The voice came again, different this time. Doll, ton. Jimmy whimpered, pressing back against the wall. Make it stop. Please make it stop. Walsh. Now it was calling the Master Sergeant's name, the pronunciation improving with each repetition, as if practicing, perfecting. The emergency lights flickered. The recording equipment began spinning faster, the tape reels accelerating beyond normal speed. Static burst from every speaker in the room, but underneath the static was that rhythmic pulse they'd heard before, the heartbeat sound, only now there were dozens of them, overlapping, creating a symphony of biological rhythms that shouldn't exist beneath frozen earth. We're leaving, Walsh commanded. Right now, back to the entrance, regroup with the others, and we're evacuating this station. He moved toward the door, but Tommy stood frozen, staring at the monitoring equipment. One of the screens had changed, displaying something that shouldn't be possible. It was a seismic readout, showing subsurface movement patterns, but the patterns weren't random. They formed shapes, geometric designs spreading outward from a central point directly beneath the operations room. Sergeant, Tommy said numbly, it's not just listening, it's mapping. It knows the entire layout of the station. Walsh grabbed Tommy's arm, pulling him toward the door. I don't care what it knows, The lights died. Absolute darkness crashed over them like a physical weight. Tommy heard Jimmy sob, heard Walsh curse, heard his own heart hammering against his ribs. Then, the emergency lighting came back on, dimmer now, pulsing slowly like a dying heartbeat. And in that pulsing red light, they saw what had appeared on the operations room wall while they stood in darkness. Handprints. Dozens of them. Pressed against the metal from the inside, as if the wall had become permeable and something had reached through from the other side. The prints were too large, the fingers too long, and they glistened with moisture that dripped slowly down the wall like condensation, or sweat. From beneath the floor came a new sound. Movement. Not the dragging they'd heard before, but rapid, purposeful motion. Multiple entities moving in coordination, approaching from below. Run! Walsh screamed. They bolted from the operations room, but as Tommy crossed the threshold, he heard one final word from the speakers behind them. A word spoken in perfect, chilling clarity. Home. Tommy ran blindly through the corridor, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly off moisture-slick walls. Behind him, Jimmy's panicked breathing and Walsh's barked commands created a chaotic symphony punctuated by their boots hammering against metal flooring. The emergency lights pulsed in rhythm with that horrible heartbeat sound, turning their escape into a strobe-lit nightmare. They burst into the mess hall to find chaos. Crawford had his rifle trained on the floor, Mitchell was shouting orders, and Fletcher knelt beside Hayes, who sat against the wall, blood streaming from his nose. What happened? Walsh demanded, immediately taking command despite his own terror. The floor, Crawford said without taking his eyes off a spot near the center of the room. It moved. Actually moved, buckled upward like something pushed it from underneath, knocked Hayes off his feet. Tommy looked where Crawford aimed. The metal floor plate had indeed warped, rising several inches in a perfect circular dome. Around the edges, the bolts had sheared clean through. Whatever force had created that deformation was immense. We need to leave, now, Walsh ordered. Everyone back to the entrance. We're aborting this mission. Negative, Kozlowski's voice cut through from the doorway. The technical sergeant stood there, his device in hand, his expression grim but determined. The entrance corridor has collapsed. Ice shifted outside. The doorway is completely blocked. We're sealed in. The words hit like a death sentence. Jimmy started hyperventilating. Fletcher looked up from Hayes with wide, terrified eyes. Even Crawford's iron composure cracked slightly. "There has to be another way out," Mitchell said, his voice steady through sheer force of will. "Emergency exits, ventilation shafts, something." Kozlowski shook his head. "I've checked the schematics. This station has one primary entrance and one emergency hatch, which leads to the subfloor maintenance level." "The level where that thing is," Crawford stated flatly. "Where those things are," Kozlowski corrected. "Plural. Based on thermal imaging, there are at least 6 distinct heat signatures moving beneath us. They're circling the station, creating a perimeter." Tommy felt the world tilting. 6 of them. 6 entities that could mimic human speech, that could generate heat in Arctic conditions, that had somehow driven or drawn the entire crew of Polar Echo away from their posts. And now those same creatures had them trapped. "Margaret," Tommy whispered, thinking of his wife, of the baby he'd never meet if he died here. He pressed his hand against his jacket pocket, feeling the crinkle of her letter against his chest. The floor shuddered. Not violently, but in a slow, undulating wave that traveled from one end of the mess hall to the other. It felt less like a tremor and more like something enormous shifting its weight beneath them, adjusting its position. "They know we're trapped," Hayes said, his voice nasal from the blood. "They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Jimmy asked, though no one wanted to answer. Walsh moved to Kozlowski. "The emergency hatch. Where is it?" "Barracks area. Leads to a maintenance crawl space that runs beneath the entire facility. From there you can access the generator room, water systems, and the foundation supports. It's a 3-foot clearance at best." "And that's our only option?" Kozlowski met Walsh's gaze. "Unless you want to wait here until the station collapses or they come up through the floor, yes, that's our only option." Walsh turned to address the group. Tommy saw the weight of command crushing down on the Master Sergeant, saw him calculating odds and accepting a terrible reality. They were going to have to go down, into the dark, into the narrow spaces where those things moved freely. "Listen up," Walsh said, his voice carrying the forced calm of a man refusing to show fear to his soldiers. "We go to the hatch. We go down. We find a way to the generator room and cut power. Maybe that disables whatever's down there. Then we find an alternative exit or dig our way out. We move as a unit. Nobody separates for any reason. Understood?" "Sergeant," Fletcher spoke up, his medic's instinct overriding his fear. "Hayes needs medical attention. That's not just a nosebleed. He might have a concussion." "I'm fine," Hayes protested weakly, though his pale face suggested otherwise. "You'll stay between Mitchell and Crawford," Walsh decided. "They'll keep you upright. Everyone else maintains visual contact. Kozlowski, you lead. You know the layout. Harker, Dalton, your middle position. Fletcher, stay with Hayes. Crawford and Mitchell, rear guard. I'll float position. Move out." They gathered their equipment with shaking hands. Tommy checked his rifle for the 3rd time, knowing bullets likely wouldn't help against whatever waited below, but needing the illusion of security. Beside him, Jimmy was mumbling something. A prayer, Tommy realized, the words tumbling out in a desperate whisper. They moved through the station like condemned men walking toward the gallows. The corridors seemed to have changed, become more organic. The walls glistened with condensation that formed patterns, not random but deliberate, like writing in an alphabet that predated human language. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, carrying that same salt and rust smell that suggested ancient things and deep earth. They reached the barracks. The room where 8 men had once slept peacefully now felt like a tomb. The bunks cast long shadows in the emergency lighting, and in the floor, near the far wall, was the hatch, a 3-foot square of reinforced steel with a wheel lock in its center. Kozlowski knelt beside it, examining the mechanism. "It's been opened recently. The seal is broken." "Recently?" Crawford moved closer. "How recently?" "Within the last 12 hours. Kozlowski ran his hand around the edge. From below, someone, or something, opened this from underneath. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. The creatures hadn't just been beneath the station, they'd been inside it. They'd come up through this very hatch, moved through these corridors, stood in these rooms. What happened to the men? Tommy heard himself ask. The crew. Where did they go? No one answered because no one wanted to say what they were all thinking. The crew hadn't gone anywhere. They were still here, just not in any form that could be called human anymore. Kozlowski gripped the wheel lock. Once I open this, there's no going back. Whatever's down there will know we're coming. They already know, Walsh said grimly. Open it. The wheel turned with a metallic that echoed through the barracks. Once, twice, 3 rotations. Then Kozlowski pulled, and the hatch lifted with a pneumatic hiss that released a gust of warm, humid air that stank of salt water and something else. Something organic and wrong. Tommy shined his flashlight down into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow shaft with a ladder descending into darkness. The walls were smooth, too smooth, covered in that same yellowish discoloration they'd seen outside. And far below, perhaps 20 feet down, the light reflected off something wet and moving. I'll go first, Kozlowski said, shouldering his equipment. Give me 30 seconds to check the crawl space. If I don't signal, seal the hatch and find another way. He descended quickly, his boots disappearing into the dark. They counted silently. 10 seconds, 20, 25. A flashlight blinked twice from below, the all-clear signal. Mitchell, you're next, Walsh ordered. Then Hayes, Crawford, Fletcher, Dalton, Harker. I'll bring up the rear. One by one, they descended into the crawl space beneath Polar Echo Station. Tommy was second to last, and as his boots left the solid floor of the barracks, he took what might be his final look at the world above. The bunks, the photographs, the personal effects of men who would never return home, just like he might never return to Margaret. Then he was descending, rung by rung, into the wet darkness where things that had learned to speak waited in the shadows. At the bottom, the crawl space stretched in 4 directions, narrow tunnels barely 3 feet high, forcing them to crouch or crawl. The walls weren't concrete or metal. They were ice, but ice that had melted and refrozen repeatedly, creating smooth, almost organic surfaces. And carved into those surfaces, running the length of the tunnel like veins under skin, were channels, shallow grooves that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light. My God, Fletcher, it's alive. The whole substructure is alive. From somewhere in the darkness ahead came a sound that Tommy would hear in nightmares for the rest of his life, however long that might be. A voice, multiple voices, speaking in unison. Welcome home. The crawl space was a nightmare made manifest. Tommy's shoulders scraped against walls that weren't quite ice and weren't quite stone, something in between that felt disturbingly warm to the touch. He moved on hands and knees, his rifle slung awkwardly across his back, flashlight clenched between his teeth. The beam illuminated only a few feet ahead where Kozlowski's boots disappeared around a curve in the tunnel. Behind him, Jimmy's breathing had deteriorated into barely controlled panic. I can't do this. It's too tight. I can't breathe. Keep moving, Dalton, Crawford's voice came from further back, steady despite the circumstances. Focus on the man ahead of you, one movement at a time. The bioluminescent channels pulsed with sickening regularity, providing just enough light to see the tunnel's organic architecture. Tommy realized with growing horror that the grooves weren't carved, they were grown. Something had secreted these pathways, built this subterranean network beneath a human facility like termites colonizing the foundations of a house. Hold, Kozlowski's command echoed back through the line. Junction ahead, 3 paths. Tommy crawled forward until he reached the intersection. The tunnel opened into a slightly larger chamber, perhaps 5 feet across, where 3 passages diverged. Kozlowski crouched there, consulting a waterproof map with his flashlight. According to schematics, the center tunnel leads to the generator room. Right passage goes to the water reclamation system. Left tunnel... He paused, frowning. Left tunnel doesn't exist on any blueprint. What do you mean it doesn't exist? Mitchell squeezed into the junction, his broad shoulders barely fitting. It's right there. The left passage was different from the others. Wider, smoother. The bioluminescent channels concentrated along its walls in intricate patterns that suggested purpose rather than random growth. And, unlike the other tunnels, this one sloped downward at a steep angle, descending deeper into the ice. That's where they are, Hayes said quietly. He'd crawled up beside Tommy, his face pale but his eyes focused. That's where they took the crew. You don't know that, Fletcher objected, though his voice lacked conviction. I do. Hayes pointed to something Tommy hadn't noticed, markings on the walls of the left tunnel. Not scratches or cracks, but deliberate symbols etched into the ice. And below them, frozen in the slick surface, were personal items. A watch, dog tags, a wallet with a photograph visible through the ice. Jesus Christ, Jimmy whispered. Those belong to the station crew. Walsh crawled up, examining the items. His jaw tightened as he recognized a set of dog tags. Corporal Dennis Rourke. He was the operator who made the last log entry. He looked down the descending tunnel. They were brought down here, or they came willingly. Willingly? Mitchell's voice carried disbelief. Why the hell would anyone go down there willingly? Before anyone could answer, a sound echoed up from the depths of the left passage. A rhythmic scraping, like something large dragging itself across ice, accompanied by that wet breathing sound they'd heard on the tapes. But closer now. Much closer. The bioluminescent channels flared brighter, pulsing faster. A warning or a welcome, Tommy couldn't tell which. We take the center tunnel, Walsh decided quickly. Generator room. We shut down whatever power source is feeding this thing. Everyone move, now. They funneled into the center passage, crawling with renewed urgency. Tommy's knees ached, his hands numb from contact with the cold floor. He tried to think of Margaret, of home, of anything but the suffocating darkness and the growing certainty that they were being herded rather than choosing their path. The tunnel narrowed further, forcing them to crawl on their bellies. Tommy's rifle caught on a protrusion, and he had to stop to free it. In those seconds, separated from Jimmy ahead and Crawford behind, true claustrophobia seized him. The walls pressed in, the ceiling lowered, the darkness became absolute beyond his flashlight's small cone of illumination. He heard breathing that wasn't his own. Something was in the tunnel with them. Tommy froze, not daring to move. The breathing continued, slow, wet, coming from behind him where Crawford should be. But this wasn't Crawford. This wasn't human at all. Crawford? Tommy whispered. The breathing stopped. Then a voice, distorted and wrong, spoke from the darkness behind him. Mar-gar-et. His wife's name. The thing was speaking his wife's name. Terror gave Tommy strength he didn't know he possessed. He lunged forward, crawling frantically through the tunnel, not caring about the rifle scraping his back or the walls tearing his uniform. He had to get away from whatever had whispered Margaret's name in the dark. He burst into another chamber, larger this time, perhaps 10 feet across, where the others had gathered. They stared at him as he emerged, wild-eyed and gasping. "Harker, what?" Walsh started. "Something's behind me," Tommy panted. "In the tunnel. It spoke. It said my wife's name." Crawford emerged from the tunnel seconds later, looking confused. "What are you talking about? I've been right behind you the whole time." "Then what was—" Tommy's voice trailed off as realization hit. There had been something between him and Crawford. Something that had inserted itself into their line, mimicking human presence. Kozlowski did a quick head count, his flashlight illuminating each face. "Everyone's here, all 10 of us." "Then what did Harker hear?" Mitchell demanded. The answer came from Jimmy, who stood staring at the chamber's far wall. "Guys, look at this." They turned their lights to where he pointed. The chamber was dominated by a massive object, a cylindrical structure protruding from the wall, roughly 8 feet in diameter, covered in frost but clearly not natural ice. It looked manufactured, deliberate, ancient. "What the hell is that?" Fletcher breathed. Kozlowski approached it slowly, running his device across its surface. "Metal. Composite alloy I've never seen before. It's not from this station." He paused, adjusting his readings. "Not from any station. This predates human construction by... I can't even calculate. The isotope ratios suggest this has been here for thousands of years." "Impossible," Mitchell said. "This is a listening post, built in 1979. That thing can't have been here before." "They didn't build the station on virgin ice," Kozlowski interrupted. "They built it on top of this. Whatever this structure is, it was already here. The station was constructed directly over it." Tommy felt sick. "You mean someone knew? Someone knew this thing was down here and built a facility on top of it anyway?" Kozlowski's expression was unreadable. "I mean, this entire station might have been built specifically because this was down here. To study it, to monitor it." He paused. "Or to contain it." The cylindrical structure hummed suddenly, a deep vibration that resonated in their bones. The frost on its surface began to melt, running in streams that revealed symbols etched beneath, not human writing, but geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in dimensions the human eye wasn't meant to perceive. "It's activating," Hayes said. "Our presence is activating it." The bioluminescent channels throughout the chamber flared brilliantly, and Tommy finally understood their purpose. They weren't random growths. They were conduits, connections, linking the ancient structure to something deeper, something still buried in the ice below. A new sound emerged from the structure, not mechanical, not organic, but somewhere between. A rhythmic pulsing that matched the heartbeat sound they'd heard throughout the station. Only now they could hear what it really was. Not a single heartbeat, but multiple hearts beating in perfect synchronization. "The crew," Hayes whispered. "Oh God, the crew is inside that thing." The structure's surface became translucent, frost melting away to reveal dark shapes suspended within. Human shapes, 8 of them. The missing crew of Polar Echo Station, preserved in some kind of amber-like substance, their eyes open, their mouths forming silent screams or prayers. But they weren't dead. Tommy could see their chests rising and falling in that same synchronized rhythm. They were alive, transformed, connected to the structure and to whatever network of entities lurked beneath the ice. "We need to get them out," Fletcher said, his medic's instinct overriding his fear. "We need to destroy this thing," Crawford countered, raising his rifle. "Stop!" Walsh commanded. "Both of you! We don't know what happens if we damage it. Those men might die. Hell, we all might die." The structure pulsed again, brighter this time. The preserved crew members' eyes moved in unison, focusing on the rescue team. And then, from the structure itself, came voices. 8 voices speaking as one, using the mouths and vocal cords of men who no longer controlled their own bodies. "You should not have come. You should not have come. You should not have come." The words echoed through the chamber, through the tunnels, through the entire substructure. And in response, from the depths below, something massive began to move. The floor beneath them shuddered with such force that Tommy was thrown onto his side. His flashlight skittered across the ice, its beams spinning wildly before Mitchell caught it. The cylindrical structure pulsed like a grotesque heart, and the preserved crew members inside began to convulse, their bodies jerking against invisible restraints. "Generator room!" Walsh shouted over the rumbling. "We cut the power now!" "It won't matter," Kozlowski yelled back, his device screaming with readings. This thing isn't running on the station's power, it's running on something else, something biological. The generator feeds the station, but this is self-sustaining. A crack split the chamber's ceiling, raining chunks of ice and frozen earth. The tunnel they'd entered through began collapsing, sealing their escape route. Crawford fired his rifle at the cylindrical structure in desperation, but the bullets sparked harmlessly off its surface. "Cease fire," Walsh commanded. "Crawford, stand down." "We're trapped," Jimmy screamed, backing against the wall. "We're all going to die down here." Tommy's mind raced through the horror, trying to find logic, trying to find survival. He thought of Margaret's letter in his pocket, of her handwriting describing yellow paint and baby names. He'd promised to come home. He couldn't break that promise. Not like this. "There!" Fletcher pointed to a narrow passage in the far corner of the chamber, barely visible, partially hidden behind the ancient structure. "Another tunnel!" Kozlowski checked his map, then shook his head. "That's not on any schematic either. It could lead anywhere. Could be a dead end." "Better than staying here." Mitchell was already moving toward it, half dragging Hayes. "Move, people!" They scrambled toward the passage as another violent tremor shook the chamber. The cylindrical structure's humming intensified, and the crew members inside opened their mouths in unison. But what emerged wasn't screaming. It was a coordinated sound, almost musical, rising and falling in patterns that suggested language far older than human speech. Tommy was third in line entering the new tunnel when he heard it. A single voice breaking from the chorus, struggling against the synchronized control. It was weak, barely distinguishable, but unmistakably individual. "Help us." He stopped, turned back. One of the preserved men, Corporal Rourke, the operator who'd written the final log, had his eyes fixed on Tommy. Tears ran down his frozen face, the only part of him that seemed capable of independent movement. "Please, kill us. Better than this." "Harker, move." Walsh grabbed Tommy's arm, pulling him into the tunnel. "We can't leave them." Tommy resisted, his humanity warring with survival instinct. "They're already gone." Walsh's face was inches from his, desperate and honest. "Those aren't men anymore. They're part of it now. We can't save them, but we can save ourselves." Another crack, wider this time. The chamber was collapsing. Tommy let himself be dragged into the passage, Rourke's pleading eyes the last thing he saw before darkness swallowed them. This tunnel was different, older, rougher, carved by something other than the smooth, organic process that had created the others. Tommy crawled through spaces so narrow his chest compressed with each breath. Ahead, he could hear Kozlowski and Mitchell grunting with effort, the passage forcing even their military conditioning to its limits. "I see something," Kozlowski's voice echoed back. "Opening ahead!" They emerged one by one into a cavern that shouldn't exist. Tommy stood on shaking legs, his flashlight revealing a space the size of a warehouse, carved deep beneath the Arctic ice. But this wasn't a natural formation. The walls bore marks, deliberate, systematic excavation dating back decades, perhaps centuries. "What is this place?" Fletcher whispered, his voice swallowed by the cavern's immensity. Kozlowski walked forward slowly, his device forgotten at his side. This is why Polar Echo was really built. This is what they were monitoring. The cavern's center held something that defied comprehension. A massive, circular structure, partially excavated, protruding from the ice like the tip of something unimaginably larger buried below. It resembled the cylindrical object they'd seen in the chamber, but on a scale that suggested the smaller structure was merely a node, a connection point to this primary mass. The surface was covered in symbols, but these were accompanied by something else. English text, recently painted, alongside Russian characters, German, and languages Tommy didn't recognize. Someone had been down here, studying this thing, trying to understand it. "Multiple nations," Mitchell observed, reading the markings. "This is a joint operation. Americans, Russians, Germans, they've all been down here." "We were never enemies," Kozlowski said. "Not really. We were collaborators. The Cold War, the listening posts, the secrecy. It was all theater to hide this, to study what lies beneath the ice without the public knowing. "You knew," Crawford said, his voice. He turned on Kozlowski, raising his rifle. "You knew what we were walking into. You're not a technical sergeant, you're intelligence, you're one of them." Kozlowski didn't deny it. "I'm a researcher, yes, but I didn't know about the crew. I didn't know it had advanced this far." He gestured to the massive structure. "This was dormant when I was last briefed. It's been dormant for 50 years. Your mission, our mission, was supposed to be routine recovery. Something changed. Something woke it up." "The crew," Hayes said, wiping blood from his nose again. "They activated it. That's what the logs meant. They were conducting experiments, probing it, studying it. They pushed too far, and it responded." "What is it?" Jimmy asked, his voice in the vast space. Kozlowski approached the structure, placing his hand against its surface. "We call it the Sleeper, found by a Soviet expedition in 1947, hidden by international agreement. Every major power knows about it. It's not human. It's not from Earth. And it's been under the Arctic ice for at least 20,000 years, possibly longer." Tommy felt reality fracturing. "Aliens? You're saying this is alien?" "I'm saying we don't know what it is. Alien suggests it came here. But there's evidence it might have been here before us. Before humanity. We might be the aliens on this planet, Private Harker." The structure pulsed, responding to Kozlowski's touch. The symbols along its surface began to glow with that same bioluminescent light, spreading outward in waves. And deep within the ice, something massive shifted. "It knows we're here," Fletcher said. "It's been aware of us this whole time." "Not just aware," Walsh said. "It's been calling to us. Those voices, those mimicked words. It wasn't trying to scare us. It was trying to communicate, to understand us." "Or to convert us," Crawford added, "like it did the crew, turn us into nodes for its network." The cavern floor trembled. Cracks radiated outward from the central structure, and through those cracks came warmth, humidity, and that salt water smell. Tommy realized with mounting horror that the ice beneath them wasn't solid. It was hollow. The structure they could see was just the surface. Beneath them, extending down for miles perhaps, was the true body of the Sleeper, a mass so vast it could swallow the entire station and everyone in it without strain. "We need to collapse this cavern," Mitchell said. "Bury it again. Maybe that'll put it back to sleep." "Or it'll just dig itself out," Kozlowski countered. "You're talking about something that survived beneath Arctic ice for millennia. You think a cave-in will stop it?" "Then what do we do?" Jimmy's voice cracked. "We can't fight it. We can't leave. We can't—" A sound cut through the cavern, a deep, resonant tone that wasn't quite sound, wasn't quite vibration. It bypassed their ears and spoke directly to something deeper, primal, written into the oldest parts of their brains. Tommy felt it in his bones, in his teeth, in the base of his skull. And suddenly he understood. Not with words, not with thoughts, but with pure comprehension that flooded his consciousness like ice water. The Sleeper wasn't trying to harm them. It was trying to save them. "It's showing me something," Tommy heard himself say. It's afraid." "Afraid?" Walsh looked at him. "What are you talking about?" "There's something else, something coming." Tommy's eyes widened as images flooded his mind. Not his memories, but the Sleeper's. That's why it woke up. Not because of the crew's experiments, because it sensed something approaching. Something worse. The structure pulsed again, and this time all of them felt it. A shared vision of darkness spreading across the Arctic, of something ancient and hungry moving through the ice, drawn by the heat and noise and life of Polar Echo Station. The Sleeper hadn't been hunting them. It had been trying to warn them. And now it was too late. The cavern plunged into absolute darkness as every bioluminescent channel extinguished simultaneously. Tommy's flashlight flickered, dimmed, then died. Around him, the other lights failed one by one until only the emergency chemical glow sticks provided weak, ghostly illumination that barely penetrated the void. "Something's draining the power," Kozlowski said, his voice tight. "Not the station power, everything. Batteries, chemical reactions, even body heat. It's feeding." Tommy felt it immediately. A creeping cold that had nothing to do with Arctic temperatures. This cold came from within, radiating outward from his core as if something were siphoning the warmth from his blood. Around him, men's teeth chattered, their breath coming in ragged clouds. "What's happening?" Jimmy gasped, wrapping his arms around himself. The answer came not in words, but in sensation. The cavern floor began to vibrate with a rhythm distinctly different from the sleeper's pulse. This was faster, chaotic, predatory, and it was coming from above, descending through layers of ice toward them. "It's in the station," Hayes whispered, his face pale in the green glow-stick light. "The other thing. It's inside Polar Echo." A sound echoed down through the tunnels they'd traversed, a wet, sliding sound accompanied by the shriek of tearing metal. Whatever had entered the station wasn't trying to hide its presence. It was ripping through the structure, following their path, hunting them with methodical determination. "How many tunnels lead down here?" Walsh demanded, turning to Kozlowski. "3 that I know of. But if this thing can reshape ice the way the sleeper can..." Kozlowski didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Crawford moved to the tunnel entrance they'd emerged from, rifle raised. "I'll hold it here. Give you time to find another way out." "Sergeant Crawford," Walsh started. "That's an order I'm giving myself, Master Sergeant." Crawford's voice was steady, resolved. "I've got 17 years in, no wife, no kids, just a sister in Ohio who'll get my pension. You got men here with families. Harker's got a baby coming. Dalton's barely out of high school. I'm the logical choice." Tommy felt shame burn through his terror. Crawford had been the suspicious one, the hardened cynic who questioned everything. But here, facing extinction, he was offering himself so others might live. "Bill," Walsh said quietly, using Crawford's first name for the first time. "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do." Crawford checked his ammunition, his movements practiced and calm. "Besides, I always wanted to go out fighting something that mattered. Better than a bar fight in Seoul or a training accident." He looked at each man in turn, his scarred face softening slightly. "You boys get topside. Tell them what's down here. Make sure someone knows." The sliding sound grew louder, closer. Through the tunnel came a smell that made Tommy's stomach heave. Sulfur and rot, and something sweet underneath, like fruit left too long in the sun. It was the smell of something ancient and wrong, something that had no place in the frozen Arctic. "Go!" Crawford barked. "Now!" Walsh made the decision every commander dreads. "Move out. Kozlowski, find us an exit. Mitchell, take point. Harker, Dalton, stay close. Fletcher, keep Hayes upright." They ran toward the far end of the cavern, where Kozlowski's map suggested another passage might exist. Behind them, Crawford positioned himself at the tunnel mouth, dropped to one knee, and aimed into the darkness. "Come on then," Tommy heard him mutter. "Let's see what you got." The team was 50 yards away when Crawford's rifle opened fire. The muzzle flash illuminated the cavern in strobing bursts, and in those flashes, Tommy glimpsed something that would haunt whatever remained of his life. Something pale and segmented was pouring from the tunnel, not crawling, but flowing like liquid, reforming itself as it moved. It had no distinct shape, no fixed form. Parts of it resembled limbs, then tentacles, then nothing recognizable at all. And embedded throughout its mass were objects that glinted in the muzzle flash. Dog tags, watches, wedding rings, personal effects from the station crew. It had absorbed them, consumed them, made them part of its biomass. Crawford's rifle fire tore into the creature, and for a moment, Tommy thought it might work. The thing recoiled, parts of it spattering against the tunnel walls. But then those scattered pieces moved independently, crawling toward each other, reconnecting, healing. It was learning from each attack, adapting. "Crawford!" Tommy screamed, starting to turn back. Walsh grabbed him. Don't dishonor his choice." The last thing Tommy saw before they reached the passage was Crawford standing, drawing his sidearm as his rifle clicked empty, firing methodically into the advancing mass. The creature engulfed him, and his final scream was cut short. Not ended, but transformed into something else. A sound that carried intelligence, mimicry, learning. The thing had taken Crawford's voice. They ran through passages that seemed to tighten around them, the ice walls pulsing with irregular light. Behind them, the creature's advance was marked by a horrible scraping sound, Crawford's rifle dragging along the ground, the thing using his equipment as part of its mass. "Here," Kozlowski pointed to a vertical shaft, a rough chimney carved through the ice. "It leads up, toward the surface." "How far?" Mitchell demanded. 30 feet, maybe 40. No rope, no equipment. Mitchell looked at the shaft's smooth walls. "We'll never make it." But even as he spoke, the sleeper responded. The ancient structure in the cavern's center pulsed once, and the walls of the shaft began to change. Handholds appeared, carved by some invisible force, creating a crude ladder leading upward. "It's helping us," Hayes said in wonder. "It wants us to escape." "Or it's trying to contain that other thing down here," Walsh countered. "Either way, we climb. Now, Mitchell, you first. Hayes next. Mitchell can pull you up if needed. Fletcher, Dalton, Harker, then me. Kozlowski, you bring up the rear." They climbed desperately, fingers numb, muscles screaming. Tommy's shoulders burned as he pulled himself upward, the shaft seeming to stretch forever. Below him, Walsh called encouragement. Below Walsh, Kozlowski climbed in silence. Tommy was 20 feet up when he heard it. Kozlowski's sharp intake of breath, followed by a wet, tearing sound. "Keep climbing!" Kozlowski shouted. "Don't look down! Don't—" The technical sergeant's voice cut off, replaced by a gurgling sound that dissolved into that horrible mimicry. The creature had reached him, was consuming him even as it climbed, using his body as fuel and his knowledge as data. "Climb!" Walsh roared from above Tommy. "For God's sake, climb!" Tommy's arms found strength born of pure terror. He hauled himself upward, not looking down, not thinking about Kozlowski or Crawford or the thing that was learning, adapting, pursuing. He thought only of Margaret, of her belly swollen with new life, of yellow paint and baby names and promises he'd made. The shaft's top appeared, a rough opening leading into what looked like a storage area. Mitchell's strong hands reached down, grabbed Tommy's wrists, and pulled him through. Jimmy came next, sobbing. Then Fletcher, blood running from his torn fingernails. Walsh emerged, eyes wild, and immediately turned to help the next man up. But there was no next man. Kozlowski was gone. From below came a sound that wasn't quite laughter, wasn't quite speech. Kozlowski's voice warped and stretched, speaking words that hurt to hear. "Thank you for the knowledge." The thing had everything Kozlowski knew, every classified detail, every secret location, every other installation where the sleeper's nodes existed. It had consumed not just his body but his intelligence. Walsh moved to seal the shaft entrance, but Mitchell stopped him. "No time, it's still coming." They were in a supply room. Tommy recognized it from the station layout. Above them, metal plating creaked. They were directly beneath the station's main structure. "Generator room is adjacent," Mitchell said. "If we can overload it, create enough heat and light." "It feeds on energy," Fletcher interrupted. "We'd just make it stronger." "Then we collapse the station," Walsh decided. "Bury that thing and the sleeper both. Kozlowski had demolition charges in his pack. If we can reach them—" "They're gone," Hayes said weakly. "Gone with him." A heavy silence fell. They were unarmed, exhausted, hunted by something that had killed or consumed half their team and was growing stronger with each victim. The situation was hopeless. Tommy's hand went to his jacket pocket, feeling Margaret's letter. The paper crinkled beneath his fingers, and suddenly he knew what had to be done. "There's one more option," he said quietly. "Someone has to go back down. Has to make sure that thing doesn't reach the surface. Has to seal it down there permanently." The men stared at him, understanding blooming in their exhausted eyes. "Tommy, no," Jimmy whispered. "I'm the lowest ranked here," Tommy continued, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm the observer, the one who saw everything but couldn't change anything. Now I can. This is my moment to matter." Walsh stepped forward. "Private Harker." "It's already decided, Sergeant." Tommy pulled out Margaret's letter, pressed it into Walsh's hands. "Make sure she gets this. Tell her I kept my promise. I'm coming home. Just not the way we planned." Tommy Harker stood at the edge of the shaft, staring down into the darkness where two of his brothers had already been consumed. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what he was about to do. Behind him, the remaining men of the rescue team stood in silence, witnesses to a sacrifice none of them had asked for, but all of them understood was necessary. "There has to be another way," Jimmy said, tears streaming down his young face. "Tommy, please. You've got Margaret. You've got a baby coming. I don't have anyone. Let me—" "That's exactly why it can't be you," Tommy interrupted gently. "You've got your whole life ahead of you, Jimmy. You'll meet a girl. You'll have kids. You'll tell them about this night and how you survived." He managed a weak smile. "Besides, someone needs to remember Crawford and Kozlowski. Someone needs to make sure their families know they died heroes." Walsh stepped forward, his command presence cracking to reveal the man underneath. "Private Harker, I can't order you to do this, but I can tell you," his voice caught, "I can tell you that what you're doing, it's the bravest thing I've ever witnessed." "Not brave, Sergeant, just necessary." Tommy looked at each man in turn. Mitchell, stone-faced but with moisture in his eyes. Fletcher, still clutching his medical kit as if he might somehow save Tommy from what was coming. Hayes, leaning against the wall, blood still seeping from his nose, offering a weak salute. And Jimmy, barely 18, looking at Tommy like a younger brother watching his hero walk toward certain death. "How will you seal it?" Mitchell asked practically, his military mind still solving problems even in grief. Tommy had already thought this through. "The sleeper. It's been trying to help us, trying to contain the other thing. If I can reach it, communicate with it somehow, maybe we can work together. Use its power to collapse the tunnels, seal the creature in the deep ice where it belongs." "That's suicide," Fletcher said bluntly. "Even if you succeed, you'll be trapped down there, buried alive. Better than letting that thing reach the surface." Tommy thought of Newark, of Margaret shopping for yellow paint, of civilians who had no idea what lurked beneath the Arctic ice. Better than letting it learn more, consume more, until it's strong enough to walk among people. From below came a scraping sound, the creature still climbing, patient and relentless. "We're out of time," Walsh said. He gripped Tommy's shoulder. "When you see Crawford and Kozlowski on the other side, you tell them they weren't the only heroes here today." Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice. He pulled off his dog tags, pressed them into Jimmy's hand. "For Margaret. So she has something." Then, before he could lose his nerve, before the terror could paralyze him, Tommy descended into the shaft. The climb down was harder than the climb up. His muscles screamed, his hands slipped on the icy handholds the sleeper had created. But with each downward movement, he felt something strange, a presence in his mind, gentle and ancient, acknowledging his choice. The sleeper knew what he was doing, and it was grateful. Halfway down, Tommy heard the scraping grow louder. The creature was close, perhaps only feet below him in the darkness. He could smell it now, that sulfur and sweetness stench that spoke of decay and hunger. "Crawford!" he shouted down into the void. "Kozlowski! I know you're in there somewhere. I know you can hear me. Fight it. Help me stop this thing! For a moment, nothing. Then, from below, two voices speaking in imperfect unison. Har, Kur, we try, but it learns, it consumes. We are sorry. The voices carried such anguish that Tommy nearly lost his grip. His friends were still conscious, still aware, trapped inside the creature's biomass and forced to be part of its hunting, its learning, its endless hunger. Then help me end it, Tommy cried. Help me finish what we started. He dropped the last 10 feet, landing hard in the cavern. His ankle twisted, pain shooting up his leg, but he forced himself to stand. The creature was there, filling the tunnel entrance. A mass of pale, writhing flesh embedded with the remnants of men who had been soldiers, fathers, sons. Crawford's rifle protruded from its center. Kozlowski's device was partially absorbed into what might have been a limb. And faces. God help him. Faces pressed against the translucent membrane of its skin, mouths open in silent screams, eyes tracking Tommy's movement with horrible awareness. I'm sorry, Tommy whispered to them. I'm so sorry. He ran toward the sleeper's structure, the massive ancient artifact pulsing in the cavern's center. Behind him, the creature surged forward, moving with terrible speed now that its prey was in sight. Tommy's hands touched the sleeper's surface, and his mind exploded with contact. Images flooded his consciousness, not human memories, but something older. He saw the Arctic as it had been 20,000 years ago, before humans, before civilization. He saw the sleeper descending from somewhere beyond comprehension, burying itself in the ice, waiting, watching, guarding. Guarding against something worse. The creature pursuing him was not native to Earth either. It had come later, following the sleeper's trail across the void between stars. A parasite, a consumer, something that existed only to feed and grow and spread. The sleeper had imprisoned it in the deep ice, sealed it away, and slept to maintain that prison. Until humanity had come, had built their station, had probed and studied, and awakened both sleeper and prisoner. Help me, Tommy thought toward the ancient intelligence. Help me seal it again. I know it means I stay down here too. I accept that. Just don't let it reach the surface. Don't let it reach my wife. The sleeper's response wasn't words but understanding, acceptance and sorrow and respect for the tiny creature who would give his life to help maintain a prison that wasn't his responsibility. The cavern began to shake. The sleeper was summoning its remaining power, the energy it had conserved for millennia. The bioluminescent channels flared brilliantly, running up the walls, across the ceiling, creating a web of light that looked almost beautiful. The creature sensed what was happening. It lunged for Tommy, Crawford's voice screaming from its mass, "Run!" But Tommy didn't run. He pressed his back against the sleeper's structure, spreading his arms wide as if to embrace it. "Do it," he whispered. "Do it now." The cavern's ceiling cracked. Massive chunks of ice began falling, each one weighing tons, crashing down with earth-shaking force. The creature was fast, dodging the first impacts, but the sleeper was faster, directing the collapse with precision, herding the creature back toward the deep tunnels. A falling ice block struck the creature's mass, splitting it partially. The absorbed faces screamed as one. Crawford, Kozlowski, the station crew, all the voices crying out in unison. But whether in agony or relief, Tommy couldn't tell. More ice fell. The cavern was collapsing systematically, sealing the tunnels, burying the creature under millions of tons of frozen earth. The thing tried to climb, to escape, but the sleeper's power held it down, pressed it deeper into the ice, forcing it back to the depths where it belonged. Tommy felt the ancient structure warm beneath his back. The sleeper was using everything it had left, burning through energy reserves that had lasted for millennia. And Tommy understood. This was not just containment. This was a final act. The sleeper was dying, giving everything to ensure the parasite remained imprisoned. And Tommy would die with it. The ceiling above him cracked, a massive section breaking free. Tommy looked up and saw tons of ice falling directly toward him. He thought of Margaret one last time, pictured her smile, her hand on her belly, the yellow paint she'd chosen for the nursery. "I love you," he whispered. "Tell our baby I love them too." The ice crashed down, and Tommy Harker's world went black. But not forever. In the instant before the impact, the sleeper's consciousness enveloped his own, and Tommy understood. He would not truly die. His pattern, his memories, his essence would be preserved within the ancient structure, added to its vast library of consciousness. He would sleep with it, maintaining the eternal watch, ensuring the prison held. One day, perhaps centuries from now, he might wake again. Until then, he would dream of yellow paint and unborn children and a promise kept in the only way possible. Master Sergeant Eugene Walsh stood in the frozen wasteland that had once been Polar Echo Station, watching the last helicopter disappear into the gray Arctic sky. The wind howled across the plateau, erasing footprints, covering evidence, burying secrets beneath fresh layers of snow. Within hours, no trace would remain of what had happened here, at least nothing visible to the untrained eye. 3 days had passed since Tommy Harker descended into that shaft. 3 days since the ground had shaken so violently that the entire station collapsed inward, swallowed by the ice like a stone dropped into dark water. Walsh and the 4 surviving men, Mitchell, Fletcher, Hayes, and Dalton, had barely escaped, crawling through a ventilation shaft as the structure disintegrated behind them. They'd huddled in the emergency shelter, listening to the earth groan and settle, waiting for rescue that took 48 hours to arrive. 48 hours of silence, of survivor's guilt, of Jimmy Dalton crying himself to sleep while clutching Tommy's dog tags. The official investigation had been swift and clinical. Men in suits had arrived with the rescue helicopters, men who asked precise questions and accepted vague answers. The station had collapsed due to subglacial thermal instability, they were told. Sergeant Crawford, Technical Sergeant Kozlowski, and Private Harker had been lost in the collapse. Their bodies were unrecoverable. The case was closed. Walsh had tried to protest, to tell the full truth, but a colonel he'd never met had taken him aside with eyes that carried too much knowledge and too little surprise. "Master Sergeant," the colonel had said quietly, "there are things beneath the ice that have been there longer than our nation, longer than our species. Your men died preventing something catastrophic. That will never be officially recognized, but their families will receive full honors, full benefits, and a story they can live with. Sometimes that's the only victory we get." Now, standing alone in the snow, Walsh pulled Margaret Harker's letter from his jacket. The paper was worn from repeated reading, stained with his own tears. He'd memorized every word she'd written about yellow paint and baby clothes and dreams of a future that would never come. How did you tell a pregnant woman that her husband had saved the world by being buried alive beneath Arctic ice? How did you explain that his sacrifice would never be acknowledged, never be honored, never even be believed? You couldn't. So you lied. You told her it was quick, painless, heroic in a way she could understand. You let her believe he'd died in a structural collapse, that his body simply couldn't be recovered. You let her grieve a normal death instead of an impossible one. Walsh had already drafted the letter. It sat in his bag, ready to mail when he returned to civilization. In it, he would tell Margaret that Tommy had spoken of her in his final moments, that he'd been brave, that his death had meant something. All of it true, none of it complete. "Sergeant Walsh?" Jimmy Dalton approached slowly, his young face aged a decade in 3 days. The kid who'd boarded that transport plane barely out of boot camp was gone, replaced by someone who'd seen the fragile boundary between civilization and cosmic horror. "You okay, Dalton?" It was a stupid question. None of them were okay. None of them ever would be. "I don't know how to go home," Jimmy said quietly. "How do I go back to Georgia, see my folks, pretend everything's normal?" How do I date girls and get a job and live a regular life knowing what's under the ice? Walsh was silent for a moment, watching snow blow across the collapsed ruins. You do it because that's what Harker died for. He died so people could keep living normal lives, could keep being ignorant of what's really out there. You dishonor his sacrifice if you don't take that gift and live fully. But the nightmares will fade, eventually, mostly. Walsh put a hand on Jimmy's shoulder. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. You'll have hard nights. You'll wake up sweating, thinking you hear Crawford's voice or smell that thing in the dark. But you'll also have good days. You'll meet a girl. You'll have kids. You'll grow old. And every moment of that normal, boring, beautiful life will be a testament to what Tommy did. Jimmy nodded slowly, tears freezing on his cheeks. I promised him I'd tell his kid about him one day. About what he really did. When the time is right, Walsh agreed. When the kid's old enough to understand. But be careful, Dalton. There are people who don't want these stories told. People who'll make you disappear if you talk too loud about what we found. They stood in silence, two survivors paying respects to ground that had become a tomb for heroes no one would remember. Mitchell and Fletcher emerged from their shelter, packs ready for extraction. Hayes limped between them, his concussion still causing balance issues. They gathered around Walsh, a broken unit held together by shared trauma and forced silence. Transport's coming in 30 minutes, Mitchell reported. After that, we scatter. They're splitting us up, different assignments, different bases. Standard procedure after this kind of incident. So we never talk about it, Fletcher said bitterly. We just pretend it didn't happen. We survive, Walsh corrected. We honor our dead by living. That's the mission now. The wind picked up, howling across the plateau with renewed ferocity. For just a moment, Walsh thought he heard something beneath it. A voice, distant and distorted, calling from deep under the ice. But when he focused, there was only wind. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something down there was listening, watching, waiting. The sleeper had died, sealing the creature away. Tommy had died helping it. But death, Walsh suspected, was relative for things that ancient, that powerful. Perhaps they slept now, consciousness dormant, maintaining an eternal vigil over a prison that must never break. And perhaps, in some way beyond human understanding, Tommy Harker still stood guard. The helicopter appeared on the horizon, its rotors cutting through the Arctic gloom. The men gathered their gear, preparing to leave this frozen hell behind. Jimmy took one last look at the collapsed station, at the snow-covered crater that marked where Tommy had made his stand. We should come back someday. Put up a marker or something, so someone knows. No, Walsh said firmly. We never come back. We let the ice keep its secrets. That's how we keep the world safe. As they boarded the helicopter and lifted off, Walsh pressed his hand against the window, watching Polar Echo shrink beneath them. The plateau looked peaceful from altitude, pristine and untouched, hiding the horror and heroism buried in its depths. 3 weeks later, Walsh stood on a tree-lined street in Newark, New Jersey, wearing his dress uniform and holding Margaret Harker's letter. The house was small but well kept, yellow tulips blooming in window boxes despite the late winter chill. He knocked, waited, heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and Margaret Harker stood there, 6 months pregnant, her face lighting with hope before she saw Walsh's expression and understood what his presence meant. "No," she whispered. "No, please, no." "Mrs. Harker," Walsh began, his voice steady through force of will. "I served with your husband. I'm here to tell you about his final days." She invited him in, made tea with shaking hands, sat across from him in a room decorated with yellow paint and unassembled baby furniture. And Walsh told her the sanitized version, the story she could live with, the lie that was kinder than truth. He told her Tommy had died in a structural collapse, that it had been quick, that Tommy's last words were of her. All technically true, all fundamentally incomplete. When he finished, Margaret sat in silence, one hand on her belly, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she spoke. "Did it matter? His death? Did it mean something?" Walsh met her eyes. "Mrs. Harker, your husband saved more lives than you can imagine. He's a hero in ways I can never fully explain. But yes, it mattered. More than almost anything ever has." She nodded, accepting this small comfort. "Will you tell me his last words? His real last words?" Walsh hesitated, then spoke the truth. "He said, 'I love you. Tell our baby I love them too.'" Margaret broke then, sobbing into her hands. Walsh sat with her, this stranger bound to him by tragedy and secrets, until her tears subsided and the tea grew cold. Before leaving, he placed Tommy's dog tags in her palm. "For your child, when they're old enough." "Boy or girl?" Margaret asked softly. Tommy never knew. "He'd have been proud either way," Walsh replied. 6 months later, Margaret Harker gave birth to a son. She named him Thomas Eugene Harker Jr. and raised him on stories of a father who'd been brave and kind and had died serving his country. When Tommy Jr. turned 18, his mother gave him the dog tags and told him there was more to his father's story, things she didn't fully understand but knew were important. She gave him a name. Master Sergeant Eugene Walsh, retired, living in Montana. And on a cold autumn day in 2001, a young man stood on Walsh's porch, dog tags in hand, asking about the truth of what happened at Polar Echo Station. Walsh, now 68 with gray hair and haunted eyes, invited him in. They talked for hours. Walsh told the real story, the sleeper, the creature, the sacrifice. He showed Tommy Jr. the classified documents he'd stolen when he retired, insurance against memory being erased entirely. "Your father," Walsh concluded, "died so the world could keep spinning, so people could keep living without knowing what's out there. He's a hero no monument will ever commemorate." Tommy Jr. sat in silence, processing. Finally, "Is it still down there? The thing in the ice?" Walsh nodded slowly. "We monitor seismic activity in the region. Every few years there's movement, small tremors, temperature fluctuations. Something's alive under that ice. Could be the creature trying to break free. Could be the sleeper maintaining the prison." He paused. "Could be your father, still standing guard." "I want to go there," Tommy Jr. said suddenly. "I want to see where he died." "It's forbidden territory, monitored by 3 nations. You'd never make it." "Then I'll find another way to honor him." And he did. Tommy Harker Jr. became a geologist specializing in Arctic research. He spent his career studying the ice, monitoring the deep places, looking for anomalies. He never found proof of what his father had faced, but he found enough strange readings, enough unexplained phenomena to know the story was true. He married, had children, told them carefully edited versions of their grandfather's sacrifice. The story became family legend, passed down through generations, growing more mythic with each telling. But in 2024, when scientists detected unusual thermal readings beneath the Arctic ice, readings that matched patterns last recorded in 1983, Tommy Harker III, a climatologist, recognized the signs. He contacted the authorities, sent detailed reports, warned that something might be waking again. His warnings were noted, filed, and largely ignored, because the world had forgotten what his grandfather learned in the darkness beneath Polar Echo Station. That humanity's hold on this planet is more fragile than we believe, that ancient things sleep in the deep places, and that sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and cosmic horror is the sacrifice of ordinary men who become extraordinary in their final moments. The Arctic ice continues to melt. The deep places grow warmer. And somewhere beneath the frozen wastes, in a prison built by an ancient intelligence and maintained by the consciousness of a man who loved his wife and unborn child more than his own life, something stirs. The sleeper dreams. The creature hungers. And Tommy Harker's essence, preserved in a way beyond human understanding, stands eternal watch, waiting, guarding, hoping his sacrifice will be enough, hoping the ice holds, praying the world never needs another young soldier to descend into darkness and make the choice he made, to die so others might live in ignorant peace. But if that day comes, if the prison fails, if the creature breaks free, the Harker family will remember. They will know the truth, and they will answer the call, just as Tommy did in February 1983. Some legacies are written in monuments and textbooks. Others are carved into the frozen earth, guarded by men who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. This is the story of one such man. His name was Tommy Harker. He was 23 years old. He loved his wife Margaret more than breath itself, and he saved the world. Remember him,